Sometimes it makes you wonder, is this really the word of the Lord or what? Little background to the story. Of course, we know God called Abraham and Sarah in their old age to move to a new land. With that request or demand to move, God promised that Abraham would become the father of a new nation, that his descendants would be as numerous as the sands on the shore or the stars in the sky. But Abraham and Sarah did not have children as of yet, and they were already elderly. So God promised something new to Abraham. But after 10 years in the promised land, he and Sarah still did not have a child. So perhaps because Sarah saw her husband's frustration or sadness with this reality, she proposed a solution. She said, "Have a child with my servant, Hagar." Probably not very unusual in that time. Abraham gladly accepted the offer and fathers a child through Hagar. Yet almost immediately there is tension that comes from that decision. Tension between Hagar and Sarah. Tension between Sarah and Abraham. Sarah becomes jealous of Hagar, who is looking down on her because she now has a child, but Sarah is still barren. Sarah begins to abuse her maidservant. Then God tells Hagar, after she has run away, to go back and submit to Sarah's abuse. Very interesting. He says to Hagar, "I will bless your son. He will be a wild kind of man who will struggle with other people." And then later the scriptures tell us that Ishmael, Hagar's son, and Isaac, who Sarah eventually gave birth to, themselves will struggle over the heritage of Abraham, their father. What kind of story is this? And what's really the point here? Well, there are many different perspectives. One perspective tells us that when we don't trust that God has a plan for us, and we act on our own desires, then things don't always go so well. Abraham knew that God had promised him a son, but he became impatient. His wife came up with her own solution to give her husband an heir, but that turned out to be a poor solution. She herself proposed Hagar have a child, and then she herself wasn't happy about it. This is what happens when people act on their own will and they forget the promises that God has already made to them. Some commentaries propose that the tension between Hagar's offspring and Sarah's offspring is the beginning of a historic conflict between Jews and Arabs. Muslims look to Ishmael as the heir to Abraham. He is the one who was tested and who Abraham was told to sacrifice in the Quran. Jews and Christians look to Isaac as the rightful heir. So whatever the case may be, it's clear that tensions between the two cultures and religions have very deep roots that probably go back to biblical times. Another thing is this story reminds us sadly that there will always be racial and ethnic conflict in our world. We don't always understand the sources of those conflicts, and we have to avoid oversimplifying things by simply saying some people are good and the other people are bad. We may not have the power to stop these conflicts, which I said go back to biblical times, but we're still obliged as followers of Christ to strive to live in peace with each other. In spite of our differences, Jews, Muslims, and Christians are all children of Abraham, and more importantly, children of one God. I think to some degree, Abraham and Sarah may represent each of us. We want to do God's will. We know he promises things, but we sometimes overstep our boundaries and we do what we think is best. In the end, it doesn't always turn out well. And I would suspect that most of our conflicts today stem from our own poor choices and our failure to trust in God's plan for us. So maybe we can learn something from this dramatic story. How to place our trust in God's will. How to be patient with the fulfillment of God's will. And finally, to recognize that God's ultimate plan is to bless all of his children, so diverse as we